That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Not gonna lie, I think this will be the most useful rookie running back video that you are gonna watch this offseason. Here, I'm gonna walk through my exact rookie running back prospect model. We are gonna talk about some massive red flags that we need to be avoiding, and I am going to give you real numbers to prove my process, to show with running backs that have been drafted in Dynasty leagues since 2014. That's back when I started playing Dynasty fantasy football, and we're looking at a very large sample with that data set. And at the end of the video, I will talk about the running backs in this draft class, the red flags that they have, and the players I think we should be avoiding. But before we get into it, you know what I'm going to say. Go down there, drop a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Go and get our Dynasty research book, whether that's on flockfantasy.com where you can purchase it outright. But there's a better way. If you have not taken advantage of our offer with Underdog Fantasy, I'm sure y'all have seen me get a ton of live drafts going on Underdog Fantasy this offseason. We're going to be drafting there pretty much every single day through the rest of the offseason. Make sure you go sign up with promo code FLOCK. And when you sign up with promo code FLOCK, you will get our in-depth Dynasty research book, over 100 pages of quality information, and you will get access to our premium content on Locals, which will host our Dynasty rankings, our Dynasty rookie rankings. And on top of that, Underdog will match your first deposit dollar for dollar up to $100. So please make sure you take advantage. That should be it. Let's go through. Let's dive into these rookie running back red flags. And the first thing that we have to bring up is something I talk about all the time. Let's go and let's look at the BMI of these running backs coming into the NFL and how it has affected them historically. Now, just to set the stage on exactly how I have gone through and collected this data and how I have proven that every single one of these categories is relevant, does translate, at least have correlation to NFL and Dynasty League success, and how when we combine all of these, we have a very accurate model at the end. Let's go through, walk through this process. So we have tracked, according to DLF, Dynasty League Football, they have tracked ADP every single offseason, every single month since 2014. So I have gone to June, so the month after the NFL draft, and we have looked at every rookie running back drafted since 2014. I have logged them. I have built out their profiles. We've collected their BMI. We've collected their 40-yard dash, their NFL draft capital. We also went through, collected their team college target share. We marked if they declared early or not to the NFL. And on top of this, we actually tracked their Dynasty League ADP value for the first 3 years of their NFL career. I mean, you can find a lot of that information in that Dynasty research book regarding how we track that ADP to identify those players we need to be targeting in different portions of your rookie draft. But that's a long explanation to eventually get down to the fact that there have been 91 running backs put through this mode. Well, we'll get to a little bit more at the end of the video. But with those 91 running backs, we have the first subsection of players that were drafted in Dynasty drafts. And then we filtered that number down. We filtered that number down to the running backs that had some success. And how we gauge that mark is if you were still drafted in the top 100 picks of Dynasty leagues by your third season. I want to say, yeah, you may not be fantastic. Yeah, you may be someone like Ronald Jones. You may be someone that's a low-end running back too, but at least you're still on the radar. And I think that's enough for us to be able to include you in this data set to say you have what it takes to be a running back that matters in Dynasty Fantasy Football. So we've whittled that down, and that number is 36. There were 36 running backs that were still top 100 Dynasty picks by the time they got to their third season. Okay, so now we have those two subsections. We have all the running backs that were drafted and the successful running backs. And to go through and to just make some measurements really quickly, if we are breaking down the BMI for these running backs that were all drafted in Dynasty leagues, if you're marking at 30.5, that was almost half of the running backs. Half of the running backs that came in, 47 out of 91, had a BMI less than 30.5, which, I mean, that's not that big of a deal. Of course, that means nothing unless we put some context behind it. But just to fill out the rest of this chart, if we're looking at running backs that had a BMI less than 30 that were drafted, that was 32 out of 91. So about a third of those options. And then running backs that had a BMI less than 29.5, that was 21 out of 91. So about 23% of running backs drafted had a BMI that low. So those are some starting measurements. And what we need to see is we need to see if the running backs that were able to maintain their position in the top 100 picks, if they were bigger, if they were smaller, or if it was negligible. And I think that the results speak for themselves. If we're looking at running backs that stayed in the top 100, we have 36 of these players. And out of those 36, only 15 of them had a BMI less than 30.5. So that's a 10% drop off compared to what we saw with the overall population. Then if we go move that number down to 30, that's 9 out of 36 of them had a BMI less than 30. That's 25%, exactly 10% less than the normal population. And then if we go move that down to 29.5, that's 6 out of 36 of those running backs, 16.6%, about 7 to 8% less than what we had with the overall population. So clearly, BMI is a massive indicator on which running backs are going to be able to find success at the next level. If I had to draw a red flag mark, I would call that at 30.0, considering you only have a 25% chance of finding a running back that finished with some significance after their third season with a mark of that BMI or lower. But of course, 25%, there's still a lot of running backs that were able to do it. So this is by no means where this evaluation stops. We have to look for other variables. We have to just continue to whittle it down so we have an accurate prospect model that we're able to filter these new rookies through. And our next one, it's going to be 40-yard dash. Obviously, we still have the same number of running backs that were drafted overall coming in, and we have the same number of running backs that were left over at the end. Now, if we look at running backs that ran slower than a 4.60 40-yard dash coming into the NFL, you had 13 out of the 91 running backs with that finish, so 14.28%. And if we find those running backs that had success and were able to maintain that spot in the top 36, that was 8.33%. Only 3 out of the 36 running backs there ran slower than a 4.60. So that is, in my opinion, a massive red flag. If you're coming in and you can't crack that 4.60 threshold, I am going to be very worried about you. Now, if we go and move that baseline up just to see, okay, so we know that there's definitely a correlation. You definitely need to be faster than a 4.60, but does it continue to improve when you get a faster running back overall? The answer is yes. So if we move this baseline to a 4.50, there were 57%, 52 out of 91 total running backs drafted that ran slower than a 4.50. So over half, about 60%. And if we make that just the successful running backs, there were 19 out of 36, so 52%. So definitely a drop off, indicating that there is some correlation, not necessarily anything that we need to be running to the hills for. The main takeaway with the 40-yard dash time is going to be you need to run that 4.60. You need to do that. The 36 successful running backs in Dynasty, there were only 3 that weren't able to hit that mark. And what's going to be exciting is at the end of this video, we are going to cross-reference this with that BMI. You're going to get an even better outlook. But our next box, we're going to be looking at college target share. So this is going to be a per game sample of how many targets was the running back drawing on a per game basis and how many passing attempts did his offense have on a per game basis, dividing those, finding the percentage from that. And here, of course, you're going to find that correlation. If we are drawing that cutoff at 7.5%, there were 30 out of 91 running backs that were not able to hit 7.5%. So about a third of those guys weren't able to hit that mark. But what's very telling is if you're going over to the players that were able to maintain their place in the top 36, only 6 were not. So that's 16% compared to about 33%. So you have half the chance to stay in that top end if you were not able to get to 7.5% versus you were. And to see if this continues to correlate, the higher you get, it does. If you were able to have over 10% of your team's college target share, you were a great pass catching running back in college, you're most likely going to be a very good pass catcher at the NFL level as well. And we see that there were 58 out of 91 total running backs that were not able to hit this 10% mark or in the overall population. So that's the majority of them. That's about 64%. But if we cut that down to the running backs that found success at the next level, then that's exactly half. 18 out of 36. So this is another positive indicator. If you hit that 7.5%, I don't think we even have to raise a red flag whatsoever, but we would prefer you to be a little bit higher. Nonetheless, our last box that we are going to be looking for, our second to last one, is going to be if you declared early at the running back position. If we are looking at running backs that stayed all 4 years in college, there were 37 that stayed 4 or more years out of the 91 total that were drafted over this time period. That's over 40%. Compared to the running backs that found success, that maintained their spot in the top 100, that number goes down to 9. So 25%. Only 25% of those significant running backs had to stay for an extra year in college. Just yet another mark that matters. And the most important mark, this is not going to surprise anybody by any means, but it's going to be draft capital. I mean, here with draft capital, you had about 10.87% of these running backs overall be drafted in the first round. And if we're looking at the running backs that were left over in the top 36, 22% of them made up that mark. So of course, you're easily going to be a exciting prospect if you get drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, regardless of whatever red flags you may have. Top 64, so the top 2 rounds, that goes from being 28% of the total population to 58% of the running backs left over. And then if we move that barrier down to the top 100, that goes from being 55% of the overall running backs drafted in Dynasty rookie drafts were drafted in the top 100 picks in the NFL draft. And if we're looking at the running backs that found success, that were able to last a little bit longer, that was 86%. So essentially, you need to be drafted in the top 100 picks. If not, you are a long shot. I am sorry to say that, of course, you're always going to be able to point to examples of Aaron Jones, Austin Eckler, James Robinson, Elijah Mitchell. But the issue is having to identify those running backs, which is possible. If you look at these marks, Aaron Jones is someone that checks pretty much every single box outside of that draft capital that we're looking for. But now let's go through and let's try to use this information and apply it to this year's running back draft class. So this is going to be, in my opinion, the most useful thing that you're going to be able to take away from this video. We've already established the measures that matter, but when we start to combine these, we can really whittle down exactly what these current running back prospects look like historically. And start us off, you got Breece Hall. Breece Hall does not have a single red flag on his profile, a great pass catcher in college, an elite speed profile, a big bodied running back, and he's going to get the draft capital, and he declared early. There is not a single red flag on the Breece Hall profile. If you look at these running backs historically, they are almost guaranteed to be running back ones in Dynasty. They are almost guaranteed to be top 24 options right away their rookie season. I'm all in on Breece Hall. We've talked about him enough. But now going over to Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker only has one red flag, and if you only have one red flag on your profile, you're easily able to overcome it. Keep in mind, we were going through and looking at those marks, and a lot of times there were 25% of running backs that were able to finish in a certain range that had a red flag. So, you can easily overcome one red flag. Kenneth Walker only averaged 1.67 targets a game in college, and that was 5.4% of his overall offense. So of course you wish that number was higher. It is what it is, but it looks like Kenneth Walker, historically speaking, he's not going to be a pass catcher at the next level. It looks very similar to J.K. Dobbins, looks very similar to Nick Chubb. He can still be a successful fantasy player, but it's not going to have the upside in a PPR format that you may have from someone like Breece Hall. Now, after these top 2 guys, this is where the red flags begin to stack up on these profiles. And we have to ask ourselves, realistically, can these running backs overcome multiple red flags? And we have to ask ourselves, what do these guys look like compared to players in previous classes? And so let's start it off with Isaiah Spiller. I know we've talked a ton about Isaiah Spiller as of late, but Isaiah Spiller ran a 4.63, 4.64, dependent on where you're looking, 40-yard dash. That was at his pro day. We know pro day times are supposed to be faster than combine times. There's clearly a reason Isaiah Spiller did not run at the NFL Combine. Now, I'm not going to adjust his pro day time. I'm not going to make it slower than it already was because it was horrible. Now, if we look at those 36 running backs that had value after 3 years and we try to find running backs that ran a 40-yard dash time slower than a 4.60, Isaiah Spiller ran a 4.64 at his pro day. The running backs that ran a time slower than a 4.60, Josh Jacobs, Carlos Hyde, and James Conner. And there's a clear trend with these running backs. This goes back to saying you can have one red flag on your profile. You can be a slower running back as long as you are a big-bodied player that's going to be able to handle 20, 25 touches every single game, and you're going to thrive between the tackles, just taking an immense amount of volume. Here with these three running backs, the average weight of these guys is 227 pounds. They all have BMIs pretty much 31, 32. They're monsters. Where Isaiah Spiller, he does not fit that mold. Isaiah Spiller is a running back that has a BMI of 29.4. He is a slight build. If we are looking at those 36 running backs and we ignore the 40-yard dash time, let's go, okay, well, how many running backs, were smaller than a 29.5 BMI? I think 29.5 is a fair mark to have when he's a 29.4. There were 6 guys, those 6 players, Melvin Gordon, Christian McCaffrey, I don't even think we should be able to include him on this list because, yes, he may have been slight coming out of college, but he put on a crazy amount of weight at the NFL level. So do not think Christian McCaffrey at the NFL level is very similar to what he was as a college prospect. That is one of the very rare instances that you are going to see a player just completely transform once they get to the NFL. It's an impossible thing to project onto a given player. And he was a top 10 NFL draft pick. Like, what are we talking about? But then you have Miles Sanders, Kerryon Johnson, Tevin Coleman, Kenyon Drake. So these players, a lot of them have been able to find success at the next level. But how are they winning? They don't have the size, a lot of these guys, to be able to handle 25 touches every single week. We've seen that play out with Miles Sanders, with Kerryon Johnson, with Tevin Coleman, with Kenyon Drake. But they have the speed. They're able to be hyper efficient on a per touch basis. They have the speed where their average 40-yard dash time was a 4.47. Almost 0.2 of a second faster than Isaiah Spiller. Now, if we try to combine these two things and go, okay, what running backs had a time slower than a 4.60 and had a BMI smaller than a 29.5? 0. We have not seen a running back have success, keep that spot in their top 100 picks of the NFL draft that fit that threshold. Not to mention that Isaiah Spiller, while we thought he was guaranteed to go in the top 2 to 3 rounds of the NFL draft before the combine, before his pro day, he has been falling like a rock for everybody for a great reason. I'm sure that I am probably the 10th person you've seen in a video this week crapping on Isaiah Spiller, but there's an outside chance he falls outside of the top 100 picks of the NFL draft, which would just, be the nail in the coffin for Isaiah Spiller. Now let's go over to a running back that is my running back 4 in this draft class. Is going to be Rachaad White. So the red flags for Rachaad White, he has a BMI of 29.4, just what we were talking about with Isaiah Spiller. Looks like he is not going to be a top 100 NFL draft pick. Now, if he is, that's going to be a different story. And also, he declared late. He is 23 years old currently, which is something you can definitely overcome, but we don't want to see really any other red flags in your profile. Najee Harris is a player that declared late last year. Travis Etienne is another guy. But if you look at their prospect profiles, they had the 40-yard dash, they had the size, they had the pass catching ability, which of course Rachaad White is that elite pass catching option coming out of Arizona State. But let's go back and run through this same exercise. Those 6 running backs that were smaller than a 29.5 BMI, Melvin, McCaffrey, Sanders, Kerryon, Tevin Coleman, Kenyon Drake. They had an average NFL draft selection of 44.5, which is going to be significantly higher than Rachaad White will go in the NFL draft. And at the same time, 4 out of 6 of those players declared early, declared after year 3. Now, I know Rachaad White had to go a different route. I understand it's not like he is Christian McCaffrey going straight to Stanford, Melvin Gordon straight to Wisconsin, but that's a red flag. It's a red flag that he wasn't able to just go to a top-end program like that right away. So I am concerned about Rachaad White mainly because the draft capital as well as the BMI. If Rachaad White had a BMI of 31.0, and we could look at him going, oh, holy crap, is this David Johnson? It would be a different story, but I don't know if Rachaad White can handle 20-plus touches at the NFL level. Now, just to give a sneak peek on some of the running backs going later in this year's draft class, I hate these players. I hate them. Like, I don't get why people are talking about this running back class having depth. There's not an Alexander Madison in this class. There's not a Tony Pollard. I don't see where the upside comes from outside of really the top two guys. I can try to talk myself into someone like Rachaad White based on the receiving upside. If Isaiah Spiller goes to the end of the second round, the beginning of the third round of the NFL draft, maybe a different story with Isaiah Spiller. But these guys, like, let's go to the Georgia running backs. James Cook. James Cook has a BMI of 27.8. The amount of running backs that held significance in Dynasty that were top 100 picks overall after their third season with the BMI that low, you have one. It's Kenyon Drake. And with Kenyon Drake, he ran a 4.45. With Kenyon Drake, he was selected at the beginning of the third round of the NFL draft. He was a great pass catcher in school. Now, I know that James Cook does check a couple of those boxes. James Cook does have the speed. He was a good pass catching running back at Georgia. Now, he's not going to get the draft capital. Also, with James Cook, he did not declare early. So I'm very worried about James Cook. It's hard for us to look since 2014. So 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019, 2020, 2020. We're looking at an 8-year period. We're looking at a sample size of pretty much 100 running backs. And we can draw one comparable to James Cook that worked out, and that running back's Kenyon Drake. It's not great. And Zamir White, very similar here. Zamir White, a BMI of 29. Which, yeah, I mean, like we said, there were 6 of those running backs. Go back to that list. Melvin, McCaffrey, Sanders, Kerryon, Tevin Coleman, Kenyon Drake. But what do those running backs have in common? They're all at least capable pass catchers. A lot of them, great pass catchers. They averaged 10.91% of their team's college target share. That's a decent amount. That's a very high amount. 4 out of 6 of them declared after year 3. They had an average NFL draft capital of 44. Zamir White had his college target share under 3%. Just a non-existent running back when it comes to catching passes. On top of this, he did not declare early. On top of this, there's a good chance he does not get selected in the top 100 picks in the NFL draft. 4 massive red flags. It's going to be damn near impossible. We haven't seen it before. We haven't seen running backs overcome this before. So instead of taking these running backs, I'm probably going to prefer the receivers. Give me Justin Ross. Give me someone like that where we can see a path to upside. We can see some clear elite traits on his profile versus these running backs going later. We're going to continue to talk about these later round running backs. We're going to bring up someone like Dameon Pierce. But to be honest, I haven't talked about them that much at all because I'm not excited about any of them. They all look like players that are third string options at the next level. Now, thank you. Really hope you enjoyed this video. Really hope you got something from it. Please go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. Hope you have a great day and hope we get to see you with the video tomorrow.